Hey guys, I just fully completed Dragon Age Veilguard. It took me about 73 hours to do so. I did every single side quest in the game, and this is definitely the most controversial game of 2024. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for this review, but as always, I'm just going to give you guys my honest opinion on a game that I played. That's it, man. Many of you will probably disagree, and that's totally fine, but let's try and at least keep it civil, please. So let me give you the pros, the cons, and then my final verdict of the game. The first pro is that visually the game is fantastic looking. I strongly recommend Digital Foundry's video kind of analyzing all of the tech and stuff because it's way, you know, over my head. And those are like the turbo dweebs in the graphics industry, you know, that have the binoculars and the microscope and they pixel count and stuff like that. But all I took away from the video and all I know from playing the game is that it looks really, really good, and it actually runs phenomenally well. Also, I had practically everything maxed out, and I was at a constant 120 FPS in 1440p on my PC. So it ran great and it looks really good. You might not be a fan of the actual character designs in the game, and that's totally fine and quite understandable if I'm being honest, but one thing that I think is pretty just objectively impressive is all of the environmental design, the particle effects, the lighting, all of that is really, really good. Something I also think was really good, surprisingly so, is the sound design of the game. I really liked a lot of the music that's on display here. And the actual sound designs, whether you're slicing through a dude, whether you're parrying and counterattacking, whether you're calling in your ultimate ability and slamming the floor, you're drop kicking a dude and sending him 20 feet over a ledge, all of the sound design in the game I thought was really good as well. The voice acting, on the other hand, is very hit or miss. The main character, at least male Rook, was pretty hit or miss for me. At times they were very cringe, but at other times they were surprisingly heartfelt and compassionate. However, I think almost all of the side characters and companions are voice acted really well. I didn't really like Nev's voice acting and Tash's voice acting too much, but everybody else I thought does a great job. The highlights are obviously Varric, Solas. They're killing it, man. They're absolutely killing it, as well as another returning character. They absolutely kill it as well. I don't want to spoil too much stuff for you, but yeah, the voice acting for the most part I think is quite good. The writing is something else, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the gameplay here, I think this is also going to be hit or miss depending on your perspective, but for me, I really, really like it. It's more akin to like a God of War game. There's no more of the play pause system, no isometric camera angle or anything of that sort. But the gameplay itself is far more like hack and slash action adventure. And for me, I really like that. I really didn't mind that. I didn't find it to be a negative, other than the fact that they went from 8 or 9 abilities down to 3. I do think that that's a pretty objective negative that the game has. I'm not really sure why they decided to do that. I don't know. I don't even think it was for controller users, because I think controller users had access to the full abilities as well back in like Inquisition. So I don't really know what the point of that was. Hopefully a mod can fix that, but that's kind of my only gripe with the combat. I really do like the combat. The build that I had going was a Warrior Reaver. I absolutely maxed out my number of shield bounces. You can throw your shield in the game, which I think is a great addition. I maxed out the number of shield bounces. I made it so my shield did multiplicative amounts more damage each time it bounced, on top of adding a status effect and a stack of a status effect if they already had a status effect on them. And it was just super fun, man. Just throwing a shield, just seeing like seeing it bounce in between a bunch of dudes, having it come back to where I could catch it and throw it back, or I could perfectly time my attacks to just kind of ping pong it back and forth into dudes. I thought it was really, really fun, the gameplay. And I know some people said that, you know, they kind of got tired of it after a while. I don't know, dude. I didn't. And this is actually the first Dragon Age game that I played where I really wanted to replay because of the gameplay. I wanted to try out a rogue and like try out some of the builds that people were telling me that they were running because they sounded really fun. So I really like the gameplay here. And I like the more linear nature as well. Once again, something some people are not going to like, but I'm a 28-year-old dude. I work a full-time job. I'm a full-time student. I am not the biggest fan of open world, especially in the case of Inquisition, where, you know, you can spend 25 hours in the hinterlands hunting down sheep and flowers and shit, and that was terrible, in my opinion. This is a far more linear experience. You'll go through an area for the first time in a main quest, and then you'll have the ability to travel back to it, and, you know, you'll pick up side quests and stuff like that. There's also some Metroidvania elements there, which was a little bit surprising, because as you get more and more companions, the number of routes that you can open up in all of these areas will increase, because you can utilize their unique talents in order to open up various pathways. And I thought that that was really cool also. The overall story of the game, I think, is pretty good. I think it definitely could have been better. I think if they were to have went with Solas instead, and this is not really a spoiler, this happens in like the first 20-30 minutes of the game. If they were to have went with Solas instead, I think it would have been better. But with what they did go with, I don't think it's that bad. I think that the companion side stories are really, really good. I think a lot of the normal side quests are really solid. One of them in particular, going over Solas's past and his experiences and stuff, I think is an actual 10 out of 10 quest. The voice acting, all of the lore, all of the developments, all of that was surprisingly good. Like, if the entire game was of the caliber of that side quest, for example, I think a lot of people would be talking far more favorably about this game. And there's several side quests that are just extremely good. And each companion has like 7 or 8 quests. I mean, it gets a little bit crazy how much side content there is for the companions in the game, which is entirely optional, by the way. You don't have to do almost any of the companion side quests. So if there's a certain character, maybe Tash, that you don't want to do their side content, you are actually not forced to do that. Now, will that have ramifications on the main storyline? It will. Much like, you know, Mass Effect 2, it will, if you don't have loyal companions and stuff like that by the end of the game. But it is your choice to do, and you're not forced to do any of the companion side stuff if you don't want. That is kind of a misnomer I've seen online that I did want to kind of clear up, is that is not true. The game does not force you to do that side content whatsoever. But overall, I did think the main side quest was a little bit Marvel movie, a little cartoony, a little bit silly at times, but a lot of the side quests and a lot of the companion quests were really, really good. So overall, I do think the story is a plus here. But let's get into the negative, because there are quite a few. My biggest negative with the game was crashing. I crashed about 20 times. It was always the same crash. It said that I unplugged my graphics card, which, if you know anything about PCs, you know that's absolutely ridiculous, especially like when I'm streaming the game at the same time on my graphics card. That's absolutely ridiculous. It's impossible. So that was a little bit of a weird one, but that happened 20 times to me, and 20 times, you know, crashing in a $70 title is pretty unacceptable, in my opinion. I think that was a little bit ridiculous, but I did have quite a lot of technical issues in that regard. Other than that, though, not any bugs. It was a pretty polished experience, other than the crashes to desktop, you know, which are probably like the worst possible problems that you could have. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the writing. The writing here is Marvel movie writing. Some people really like Marvel movies. Some people hate Marvel movies. Some people just don't want their Dragon Age to be Marvel movies. I understand every single one of these groups. For me, I don't mind it. I don't mind the Marvel movie. I understand people's issues with, you know, how the game used to be versus how it is now. But this is also why I think it's very important to have an accurate frame of reference for something when you go in. And I think that going in with the wrong state of mind can really set you off negatively for a game. If you go in expecting a Dragon Age Origins hardcore, gritty RPG, then you're going to be very disappointed right out the gate, and you're not going to like the game. If you go in expecting what it actually is, which is Guardians of the Galaxy in the Dragon Age universe, then I think that you will have a far more enjoyable time. And it kind of reminds me of back in the day when I went into Red Dead Redemption 2. I went into Red Dead Redemption 2 and I thought it was going to be like, you know, Red Dead Redemption 1 or like GTA. I thought it was going to be like, oh, we are doing a ton of action, right? I could be like a hunt down all these outlaws, or I could do heists and stuff like that. It's going to be tons of action, tons of fun. And then I played the game and I was like, this is incredibly boring. And I hated it. I hated Red Dead Redemption 2 when I first played it. It was incredibly boring. The entire opening section in the snow was just, I was falling asleep. It was not what I expected, and I despised it, and I dropped Red Dead Redemption 2. However, when I then went back to Red Dead Redemption 2 with a brand new frame of mind of, okay, this is going to be a slower, more methodical, not necessarily relaxing, but more immersive game, just prepare for a whole lot of like riding on horses, very slow, you know, gameplay. I loved Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's kind of crazy how just a little bit of a frame shift in how you perceive something can really impact your enjoyment of it. And I think that that is the case with this game, where if you do go in expecting, you know, and once again, I'm not saying you're wrong to go in expecting a Dragon Age to be like previous Dragon Ages, right? I'm not saying you're wrong. I totally understand. But I'm telling you, if you go in, you know, expecting that hardcore RPG where all of your decisions are, you know, completely changing things, and you get to choose every piece of dialogue that your character says, and it's going to be, you know, a far more slow paced like action game or RPG game, I think you're going to be far more disappointed than if you go in expecting what it actually is, which is a pretty good action adventure game in the Dragon Age universe. And unfortunately, we do see this trend all over in gaming. You know, we've seen it for years and years with Bethesda, as well as, you know, the Elder Scrolls and Fallout has went from hardcore RPG to more and more action adventure game. And it does just seem, you know, unfortunately, like the trajectory that the games industry is going in. Whether that's because it sells more or whatever, I don't know, but it is the unfortunate reality. So with that being said, I do think that this is Marvel movie writing. And with Marvel movie writing, some of it is cringe. There's definitely quite a few cringe moments, but in, you know, and I'm sure you've seen them online, like they're very viral, these moments. However, I do think those are the minority of the time. I do think that for the most part, the writing is actually quite serviceable, sometimes even very good. And some of like the side content and some of the companion content, I think it actually does approach quite good. But it definitely does never hit those heights of like an Origins or something like that. But I would say that the stuff that's like hyper cringe is such a small subset of the game. Once again, it's a 73-hour long game. So if you have even 30 minutes of extreme cringe, it's such a small percentage of the game. And even people that really, really hate the game, you know, I think even if they played the game, they would realize like, oh, the stuff that I really hate is actually the minority in the game. Most of it is not that. Because I think, like I said, the companion quests, a lot of the side quests, all of that is really, really good. Some of the companion quests can be, you know, some of that cringe. And I think a lot of you know that. But, but for the most part, I don't think the writing is that bad. But I don't think, I think at times it can be cringe. At times it can be quite lackluster, especially when compared to old BioWare and old Dragon Age. I also do think, like I said, the 3 abilities, I think that's just a negative, dude. It's, I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to argue with that. It is a negative. I don't know if it's something that mods can fix. Hopefully they can. Who knows? Maybe there could be an update. I kind of doubt it. But even if you know, even if you're just on controller or something, you had an ability to hold down a button and see 3 more abilities, I think that that would also be like totally serviceable if we even had 6. But 3 is pretty criminal. Another negative I have with the game, and this is a pretty big one, something that you don't really notice when the game is like Dragon Age Origins and it's more of like a CRPG, but you notice very quickly when it's an action-adventure game, is enemy diversity. There's not enough enemy diversity and variety in the game. Like I said, when you're playing an action-adventure game, when you need to learn the timings of enemy attacks, when you need to learn the, you know, when to parry, when to dodge, you need to learn all of that. It makes it far more apparent when there's a lack in enemy variety. And I think that that's exactly what we see here. There's not necessarily less enemy variety than in past games, but just due to the nature of this game, it becomes far more apparent, far more glaring of an issue. And I think that that honestly is one of the biggest negatives of the game, is the enemy variety. It is just really, really lackluster. You're just fighting really demons, Venatori, and Darkspawn. That's about it. That's the three groups that you're fighting over and over and over and over. You know, you might throw in like a, you know, obviously a dragon in a Dragon Age game. Who would have thought? A dragon, but a lot of the dragons are also, you know, very samey, which is the same thing for other Dragon Age games also. But yeah, all of these things are kind of compounded when it's an action game like this. And I also think a negative that I have with the game is the crafting system. The crafting system here is a far more basic system than we saw in something like Inquisition. You no longer get those materials, and then you use the materials to like craft your own new weapon with a bunch of different affixes and stuff according to your play style. You no longer do that. It's a very simplified, just +1 system, and I was pretty saddened to see that, because I did really like, you know, fighting all the dragons, making the dragon bone gear, and just becoming like crazy overpowered by the end of the game. You do get crazy overpowered, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I do prefer the old school crafting system like in Inquisition. I thought that was almost a perfect crafting system. I'm not really sure why they changed it, but a bit of a negative for me. And I think my final negative here in the game is it oftentimes just it doesn't feel like a Dragon Age game. And I think that this is probably one of the biggest things that people have an issue with, but it doesn't feel like a Dragon Age game because of the fact that none of your previous decisions carry over, right? That was a really cool thing about the previous Dragon Age games, and my favorite thing about the Mass Effect games as well, and something that BioWare did really well, is that you carry over these decisions, and it really does have it has a unique feeling, man, as a result. Like, the games have a very unique feeling when you're carrying over your decisions like that, and you feel as if your world is inherently different than other people's. And by them doing this like soft reboot and only carrying over 3 things, which is criminal, dude, 3 things, all from Inquisition, you have these situations where you'll have a returning character, and it's hard to talk about without spoiling anything, but you have returning characters from other games, and it almost feels like they're skinwalkers. You're like, that's not my blah blah, because my blah blah did this and this and this, and they have this person in their life and this person in your life, right? And they try and keep it purposely vague with all of these returning characters, like, because they don't want to spoil, you know, the fact that none of your decisions carried over. But you feel it, and it feels as if none of these characters are actually the same characters that, you know, you played hundreds of hours of Dragon Age games with. And as a result, it makes it feel as if it's not really a Dragon Age game. I just think importing those decisions was such it was such an integral part of being a Dragon Age game that this does start to feel a little bit like the, you know, the Dragon Age equivalent of Mass Effect Andromeda. And that's really rough, man. I think that is probably one of the bigger things that people will bounce back on as well, because that can really hamper the entire feel of the game. But overall, what are my thoughts on this? Overall, my thoughts are this. Yes, there is some bad writing and some cringe writing and some cringe voice acting in the game. Overall, though, in the grand scheme of a 73-hour game, I think that the cringe and stuff like that people really have made viral is probably like 30 minutes of actual footage, which is such a minority of the game. Most of the game is quite good in terms of like the writing, because like the companion stuff I did really enjoy, and that's most of the game is the companion missions. Each companion has like 7-8 missions, and then a lot of the side missions are actually really good as well. That one with Solas's past is remarkably good, like insanely good. And you do have, you know, gems like that every now and then in the side content. The main content is pretty cookie cutter. It's pretty generic Marvel movie type stuff, don't get me wrong. But I also do really enjoy the gameplay. I don't think this is a bad game. I don't think that this is a terrible game. Worst game of the year. I've seen some people say worst game of the year. Bro, Concord came out this year. A historic failure. Like the most historic video game failure since E.T. back in the day, dude. Nothing is going to be worse than Concord. But even with that being said, I think this is even better than Star Wars Outlaws. I don't think that this is a bad game. I don't think it's a terrible game. I don't even think it's an average game. For me, I think this is a good game. There's far more things that I enjoyed over the course of my playthrough than things I didn't enjoy. And I actually did want to replay the game after I finished it with a different class to try out some of the other classes and some of the other builds, because I did really like the actual gameplay here. So for me, I'm going to give the game a 7.5 out of 10. You know, for me, if a 5 is average, 6 is above average, 7 is good, 8 is great. I don't think it can approach great, not with all the issues here. One, the fact that I crashed 20 times, there's just no way it can get to that level. But apparently I'm the only one crashing, so, you know, I tried to not hold that against the game too much, even though it was extremely annoying. But the writing, you know, and how hit or miss it can be, the voice acting and how hit or miss it can be, depending on the characters. I think overall I can't go better than a good, but I did have a good time with the game. Obviously I wouldn't have put 73 hours into a game that I wasn't enjoying, and I know that'll make a lot of people mad, but I think if you actually look at the game and you actually do play the game, then a 7.5 is more than fair. Asmongold, one of the game's biggest critics, he has practically led the hate army against this game. He played the game, and he even said it's a 6 or a 7. That is literally what he said after playing the game. So if the biggest hater of the game plays it and they go, yeah, you know, it's probably like a 6 or 7. And he didn't even get to do the last mission, which is phenomenal. The last mission in this game is really good. He only played like 8 or so hours. He didn't get to meet literally the best character in the game, Manfred, Chad Manfred. I have no doubt that this game is definitely at least a 7. For me, it's a 7.5. But let me know what you guys think. Do you absolutely hate it? Do you think it's SJW, DEI, trash, cringe? And if so, did you play the game, or have you watched playthroughs? Did you just watch Twitter clips or Asmongold videos? I'd love to know. Everybody I know that actually did play the game, while they do have their issues with it, I don't think any of them have said it's like a terrible game. But I'd love to hear your guys' opinion. I love hearing what you guys think about the games. I'm sure everyone will keep it entirely civil and everybody will be very nice. But anyway, that'll do it for me. Thanks for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll see all of you in the next video or stream. Bye bye.